Welcome to the Right to Reason podcast. I'm your host, Robert Stanley. Today we're going to be talking about why we believe in conspiracy theories. You know what I'm talking about. 9/11 truthers, New World Order, Freemasons, George Soros, secret CIA ops like Northwoods, Paperclip, and Fast and Furious, anti-Semitism, the Antichrist, FEMA camps, Obama gas and refugees, Pizzagate, Sandy Hook, the Deep State, QAnon, Gulf of Tonkin, Nibiru, rigged elections, anti-vax, there's fluoride in your water, and of course, Flat Earth. It was that last one that compelled psychologist Dr. Hunsinger to chime in. He couldn't take it anymore. The problem is that some of the conspiracy theories in that list were real. Could you tell them apart? How can we? How do we really know? Dr. Hunsinger was very troubled by an interview I had with a flat earther named Tyler Klatanoff, episode 60.
I don't believe that the sun is a material object, personally.
Well, wait, what? The sun's not a material object?
Yeah, I don't believe the sun is a material object. I think it's like a projection, or like kind of like a rainbow. This is what I think, at least, is that it renders like 3 to 5 miles from each person individually, and only really exists in the mind of each individual observer.
All right, you're fucking with me.
No, that's really what I think.
I was taking you as legit this whole time, because I know some people really believe. You do not believe that. What you just said is hard for me not to think you're just fucking trolling me right now, dude.
No, I know, it's crazy, man. I know.
Could you say it one more time, if you don't mind? Like, I don't. So I didn't process what you just said. Yeah, we're fucked.
No, I know it's weird. It's really.
I'm not trying
weird.
to make fun of you. I'm just saying, like.
No, I know.
I don't know.
I know it's crazy. I think we're lied to just on a fundamental level of everything.
By who?
In such a way.
Or whom?
Pretty much the Freemasons and the Jesuits. Just a bunch of rich assholes.
Do you think it's the Jews?
No.
Okay.
Zionists.
Just throwing it out there, man. Regardless, I think I could give you a little bit of rope there, but I'm afraid you're going to hang yourself with it if I do.
Yeah, and I'm sorry to... Yeah, so we definitely didn't go to the moon. I'm pretty positive that outer space is fiction. You can't have a vacuum connected to a non-vacuum.
You don't believe in outer space?
No, I don't. I think they're just lying about all that.
What are the stars when you look up at the sky? What are those? Aren't those just other suns?
No, they're not other suns. When you look at them, they look weird. They look like disco balls, and like they're rainbows, and they change colors and shit. Mm-hmm. You should look at, just type in,
like that would be like Google, maybe from the light going through our atmosphere, right?
I don't know. You kind of have to just start over.
How are we even talking right now, Tyler? We're using Skype to communicate, and then so I'm going to broadcast this.
It's all done with ground-based tech, like just towers and cables. And if they really did need to bounce things off the sky...
Towers and cables. No satellite.
No satellites. No, outer space is fake.
Cellular service, every time you talk on your cell phone, that's also a scam. That's a trick.
No, it's done with towers and cables.
The amount of organization necessary for Japan, every other major country in the world, including us, including NASA... Everybody, just every single country, even countries that we don't get along with.
So countries are fake too. I hate to be the one to tell you this, but countries are just imaginary lines in the ground that used to divide and conquer. Yeah. I
don't mean to get frustrated, man. But, okay.
I know. Maybe I should slow down with the crazy stuff, but yeah. Once you realize that the Earth actually is flat and that they are actually faking outer space, then the first and probably more important question becomes, well, what the fuck else are they lying about?
Why would they do that? Why would they just try to trick you and make you think the Earth is round?
Just because they're assholes, mostly. and also for the billions, dude. Outer space is $1 trillion scam.
Assholes, man.
Yeah, dude.
Dr. Hunsinger claims that our brains didn't necessarily evolve to understand reality as it really is. You might just be wrong about everything. Is that possible? Today we're digging in, asking the hard questions. Why do we believe in crazy stuff? And how do you know you're not just a little crazy yourself? Don't open this door if you don't want to see what's inside. You ready?
It's the Right to Reason podcast. This is Matthew Hunsinger, and you're listening to The Right to Reason.
With your feet on the air, your head on the ground. Try this trick and spin it. Yeah. Your head will collapse if there's nothing in it, and you'll ask yourself, where is my mind?
This episode of the Right to Reason podcast is brought to you by our patrons and contributors like me. We have all recognized the value of the unrestrained marketplace of ideas and have decided to make a difference. You can make a difference too. Contribute at patreon.com/right and learn more about your right to reason at therighttoreason.com. Your activism is appreciated.
Associate Professor, Applied Psychological Science Program, Matthew Hunsinger, PhD. I'm so happy to have you here, sir.
Yeah, it's good to be here. Thanks.
So I'm just looking over your bio. I mean, this is truly impressive. BS University of Mary Washington in Psychology, MS Illinois State University Cognitive Science, PhD, Experimental Social Psychology out of University of Massachusetts, UMass. I mean, member of American Pain Society, Psychological Association, Psychological Society, Mindfulness-Based Therapy and Research Interest Groups. I mean, that's just a couple of the societies and associations that you're in. I really would like to touch on mindfulness if we have time.
Sure.
I would go over your recent publications, appearances, conference presentations, but I don't think we have enough time to get into all those. But you know what you're talking about. Could we at least say that? You've dabbled a little.
I've dabbled a little
You've
bit.
dabbled here and there in the brain. One of the things that I was wanting to ask you about, you had seen a recent popular episode where I talked to a flat earther named Tyler Klatenoff.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people, I mean, the guy's become kind of a fan favorite recently because people are just like, I cannot believe, like, this guy goes over the top flat earther. Like, he's more of a flat earther than the typical flat earther. And I wanted to ask you what, like, not just about flat earth alone, but about why people believe conspiracy theories. And even the listener might say, you know, I've got a couple that I think myself. I mean, there's some stuff out there that doesn't even sound that wacky today. Like maybe JFK was killed by the mob. I mean, that's technically a conspiracy theory, but I don't sound so wacky to me. So kind of help me out. Like, why do we think this way?
Sure. Well, I think there's something very, very enticing and seductive about conspiracy theories. And I think one thing that makes them so enticing is if we think about the way that maybe reinforcement works and how that relates to behavior. So, you know, one of the most powerful ways to reinforce behavior is through intermittent reinforcement, meaning you give people a little bit of reinforcement here and there. And so, and I think one thing that's happening with conspiratorial thinking and theories is that there is some reinforcement in the sense that there can be good circumstantial evidence, you know, for that being the case. I mean, there are like these little pieces of information that we can put together that as a whole seem to support that conspiracy theory. But I guess what keeps it a conspiracy theory is it's circumstantial evidence, right? And we know when we look at like court cases that circumstantial evidence isn't always enough to prove someone's guilt, to go beyond that, you know, that shadow of a doubt that we, you know, assume innocence and we have to proceed from there. So if we kind of assume that the conspiracy theories are not correct, not that that's necessarily always a legitimate starting place, and we kind of get these little sprinkles of evidence that are not conclusive enough to say, well, we know this is happening. But there's still seems to be enough evidence that we are willing to entertain that. And I think what can easily happen is that before we have reason to believe that there isn't any ambiguity in the evidence, that it's more than just circumstantial, that people sometimes tend to go beyond, kind of overstate their conclusion based on the evidence. So saying, well, I know that this is happening, when, okay, the circumstantial evidence suggests that it is plausible, possible, maybe even plausible, maybe even likely, or that there's likely something happening that deviates from the narrative, right? That, for example, that we're hearing, but can we really say that this is happening unequivocally? So I think you have, you know, for example, a desire for structure, a desire for, minimizing, decreasing ambiguity that might feed into, the seductiveness of a conspiracy theory. Or, now I can talk more about this in relation to flat earthers in particular, but if someone has that general mindset, I think of, the world's full of deception and mind control and, secret offices and agencies and groups kind of in the dark, orchestrating things or controlling people or creating events or, controlling the flow of resources, etc., then those circumstantial pieces of evidence, can potentially be put together in a way that that the person may overstate the conclusion.
Recently, we had Tyler back on. We had another conspiracy theorist, Sean Yankee, from an earlier show about 9/11 truthers. He believes Bush did 9/11 kind of thing, right? That sort of thing. And they both spoke to a nuclear physicist, Dr. Ben Davis. What I really thought was neat about hearing both of them talking to a professional, and what might be really fun is sometime in the future, maybe I bring some of these conspiracy theory guests on and they can talk to you a little bit too. That I would love to see that kind of conversation,
Sure, I'd be happy to do that.
Yeah, but one thing that was neat is I asked, whenever you heard these bodies falling from the Twin Towers and hitting cars, that's a really just powerful emotional thing that happened. Do you think that you just needed to justify this in your head as having some real value so that you could say this event was so extreme, it was so big, therefore it kind of explains the strong emotional connection that I have to it? And they both were like, yeah, not really. but I feel like maybe when something happens in our life, it doesn't necessarily have to be a conspiracy theory. It could just be about anything, even in a personal life or something happened in your childhood or what have you. But I wonder if there's some kind of link between trauma and kind of creating some kind of illusion to explain it. And is that something that conspiracy theorists might be doing? Am I touching on something there?
Right. So not being a clinician, I fortunately can't speak to research on trauma, but I can say, so just to provide a little context for where I'm coming from and my perspective as a psychologist, is that my areas of training are in cognitive and social psychology. So my training is really more on what are the tendencies that the human mind or psyche demonstrates and stuff that we all demonstrate versus, people showing behaviors or having thoughts or feelings that, might be indicative of some kind of mental health issue, like trauma and, PTSD. So unfortunately, I can't answer your question in relation to trauma. But I will say that the human beings do seem to be organisms that are kind of, I guess I'd say, like meaning-making machines, if you will. That we look for meaning. We look for meaning, and having a meaningful existence is a really basic quality of being a human. So sometimes people who believe conspiracies exist, may attribute meaning where there is none, or may overestimate, the meaning. And I think that desire to experience meaning in relation to our emotional experiences and kind of have some amount of resolution and understanding of what happened, I think it's just part of being human. And, for someone who's into conspiracies, that desire is probably going to manifest in some way in the way they think about these events. And for someone who's not a conspiracy theorist, it may not manifest in terms of how they think about conspiracies, but it's going to manifest in some other domain, in their life. It may be there in terms of their quest around like spirituality or religion.
Is it ever justifiable to believe in a conspiracy theory, in your opinion? Is it ever like where you were talking about, well, you've got some evidence here and there, but it's not really good enough? When is it okay?
Sure, it's a good question. I really, as a consumer of information, right, we're all consumers of information. And as technology advances, there are just more and more sources of information. And it can become harder and harder to vet the quality of those sources. And so I think that for me, I try to be open to, all or many possibilities. And I try to be open to the information that's presented, but I also try to be a critical consumer of the information. So what I try to do is, let's say a friend comes to me and says, I think that, 9/11 was staged. And my question is, okay, interesting. Like, what are you seeing that makes you think that? And the person can list off a bunch of reasons. And I've watched, I forget, there's a documentary, you may know the name of it. It talks about for example, 9/11 and the international banking system and tying.
Was it loose change?
Was it?
Was it loose change?
I think so. I think that may have been it. That sounds familiar. So,
or maybe it was Fahrenheit 9/11.
I don't think it was that one, but it presented some interesting information. I was like, whoa, that's interesting. Like, that's very suspicious. And I had a conversation recently with a friend who believes that 9/11 was staged, and he presented the information, like the 5 most powerful arguments that he's come across in terms of information. And, me personally, that gives me a reason, I feel, to pause and to take a step back and say, okay, do we have a good reason to believe that what happened lines up with the narrative our government told us? Now, what I would say is, when we look at the evidence, we say, okay, what can I say based on the evidence? Can I say that it was this group of people or this entity? Can we say it was our government? Well, maybe the evidence suggests to us that what happened is not in line with the narrative our government gave us, but does that mean that they did it? Like, we might have evidence that something fishy is going on, but do we have evidence that the government did it? So I think we have to look at the evidence and decide, what does it allow us to state? Because again, there could be that temptation because of, how seductive and enticing conspiracies can be to overstate the conclusions based on the evidence that we have. So I always try to have my beliefs and statements be commensurate with the evidence that's available, and in looking at the information in terms of what's the information? Are there any other ways to explain the information I'm seeing? What's the source of the information? Can I assess the quality of that source? So yes, I think that conspiracies can be reasonable to believe in, but what I have observed is that people who believe in conspiracies, I think, tend to say more than they really can given the evidence.
Operation Midnight Climax, placed under the direction of Federal Narcotics Bureau in Boston, Massachusetts, with Officer George Hunter White under the pseudonym of Morgan Hall for the CIA as a sub-project of Project MK Ultra, the CIA mind control research program that began back in the 1950s. Before the programs were shut down, hundreds of scientists would work on them. I'm going to read a little bit on this project it's just insane. The project consisted of a web of CIA-run safe houses in San Francisco, Marin, and New York City. It was established in order to study the effects of LSD on unconsenting individuals. Prostitutes on the CIA payroll were instructed to lure clients back to the safe houses, where they would give people LSD and other mind control substances to try to test them. So, this is crazy stuff, man. If I had never heard of that sort of thing, and you were to say, hey, you know what, the CIA is trying to use mind control stuff, they're giving people LSD and they're using hookers to do it, I would say, that's crazy talk. Like, that's just as wild as somebody says, the CIA is the reason they put crack into major cities throughout America. They started the whole drug thing. Or, if you would have told me that before they released this, this really happened. Like, they've confirmed it. The CIA themselves have said, yeah, we admit it. They've released all the dossier about it and all this stuff. And I would have thought you were nuts for saying so, but you would have been right and I would have been wrong. And I wonder what kind of things we look at today. Like let's say Russia hacked the election. There's a modern one that we don't have all the evidence that would probably come out later, whether it's true or not. But right now, we're right in the middle of it. We're right in the thick of it. I have heard enough evidence for me to believe that not necessarily like the word hack would be appropriate, but at least that they influenced the election to some degree. How do I know if I'm a conspiracy theorist or if I'm just the first guy to get it right?
Right, that's a good question. And it can be challenging to know for sure, because like you said, that's a great example of a hidden operation that before it came out, and before the government admitted they did it, like you said, I agree. If someone told me that, I would have said, well, okay, maybe, maybe not. I kind of need more evidence. That's a pretty extraordinary claim that our government was doing that. But we know, like you said, from that and from other events, like, for example, the Bay of Pigs, that our government does things secretively. And it comes out, however many years or decades later. So we know that our government has engaged in behaviors that they kept secret, and they may be engaging in behaviors right now that we don't know about, of which we wouldn't approve as a nation, that we won't find out about, ever, or for however many years or decades. So the line that I like to walk, that I try to walk, is not being naive enough to think that our government isn't doing things secretively or that they're not capable of it. So being open to that idea and realizing that the government may very well right now be doing things of which I wouldn't approve. But I don't know. I mean, maybe the line in between conspiracy theorists and, like you said, the first person to figure things out is about whether the evidence warrants the conclusion. And at what point do we conclude, yes, this is happening? That's a good question. We all have to figure out what our threshold is for the quality of the evidence, and at what point we go from being unsure to being sure. I mean, the government making some official statement about something they did, for me, that passes that threshold. But something, but I'll give you a good example of something else that's happening. Something's happening currently, which I'm assuming you've heard, the QAnon conspiracy. Yeah. So this is a good example, I think, of a situation which.
I heard that was actually you, that you're actually Q, and you've
well,
been
I wasn't
behind
planning
all this.
to reveal that on this podcast, but I guess while we're talking about it,
Gotcha.
Darn it, you figured it out.
Trump thanks you for your service, sir.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I do what I can. So, here's an example of supposed information coming directly from the government.
I hate to cut you off, but it's kind of a new one. Just in case people don't know what it is, can you let them know?
Sure. So I don't know nearly as much about this as I do like the flat Earth debate, but my understanding is that supposedly a CIA member or an ex-CIA member started posting information online, letting people know about this network of government officials who are trying to take down Trump, are engaged in, I think like
deep state stuff, right?
Deep state stuff that are involved, group of individuals and kind of deep state members who are involved in trying to take down Trump, and that people who say they're aligned with Trump actually are part of that. And this is all based on someone who's claiming to be, to have access to this information, to be part of part of the deep state undercover, or at least be.
Yeah, and the other weird thing is that with these modern kind of more right-wing conspiracy stuff, we saw this coming out with Hillary and Pizzagate and that sort of thing. Every one of these seem to have something to do with pedophilia, and that's weird. That that's what they all have in common is deep state and diddling kids.
Yeah, it is. It's odd. I don't quite know what to make of that. The deep state thing, I get. I can make sense of that, but the pedophilia, sex trade, I'm not sure what to make of that. But there are people. I don't know how many people. I would imagine it's certainly not a majority of the U.S. population, but there are people who read those posts and said, okay, we know this is going on. So for me, that is well below the threshold of credulity in terms of me saying, oh, well, just this person says they were part of the government, so that must be true. So I must be able to trust what they're saying and know that they are actually part of the government, versus an official statement made by our government, the CIA, the FBI, some agency. But the people who want to believe this is the case, again, that reinforcement where it's circumstantial, but it's in line with what they believe or what they want to believe is the case. And they're willing to put aside the kind of source inequality issue that's at hand, right? There's so many alternative explanations I can come up with for that person in terms of the possibilities in terms of that person's not part of the government.
Yeah,
You know,
like just some
there are all
random
kinds of
dude.
reasons why someone might pretend to be part of the government and to be pushing, that narrative.
I've been in the right place, but it must have been the wrong time. I done said the right thing, but it must have used the wrong line.
Okay, so speaking of QAnon and the pedophilia and the deep state, and somehow it's always kind of wrapped around some kind of Trump support or what have you, Alex Jones was recently kicked off of, a lot of different places. YouTube, Vimeo, Facebook, you name it, iTunes, all this sort of thing. And it almost seems like that's going to make the conspiracy theorists kind of double down, like the backfire effect almost, where like you push somewhat and then they really believe in what they're saying, do you feel like that's a good idea? Do you feel like it's a free speech issue? Do you think that this is probably a good thing? You got to think the Sandy Hook stuff, like those parents had to leave their house because people were coming to their home and harassing them, saying, hey, you've been lying about this. You never had kids. Your kids didn't really die. I mean, there's real consequences, but at the same time, we want people to be able to talk about these things in the marketplace of ideas, because if my speech is okay and someone else's speech isn't okay, well, who's to say that tomorrow won't be my speech that's limited, right? Everybody has to be able to talk.
Right. I agree. I mean, for me, that's a really tough issue because it really challenges both of both of those notions that you talked about. Like, we value free speech and we value, anti-censorship, right? That's one of the reasons that's one of the things that makes, that allows us as citizens to create the country that we want. I'm not saying that necessarily as a group have the country that we want, but it's one thing that ensures that there is a process by which we can work towards that, is not having our speech censored, and being able to say what we think and what we feel. On the other hand, like you said, there have been some horrible consequences because of Alex Jones's behavior, and so it's something I've really debated about internally, and to be honest, I'm still not sure what to do about that situation, because I want Alex Jones to have the same rights that I do, the same speech rights, but I don't want those Sandy Hook parents to be harassed, especially because they're dealing with some major loss, and they need this time to heal, to get support. They don't need to be harassed. And I think, like you said, there's a pretty clear link between what Alex Jones is saying and how some people are responding to those parents. So it's a great question, and it's something that we're debating as a nation, clearly. And, I guess I'm okay with things like Facebook and YouTube pulling Alex Jones, at least while we have a debate as a nation, and while maybe our government has a debate to figure out what we want to do, because it does seem to be causing harm. But I think ultimately we will need to reflect more on this as a nation, because, like you said, where do we draw the line? Why do I get to say what I want, but Alex Jones doesn't? And at what point can we not say what we want? I mean, we don't have completely free speech, of course, right? I can't go onto an airplane and yell fire, or tell people I have a bomb and expect to be able to just express myself in that way freely. So we're okay with certain lines. We just need to decide as a nation where those lines are. And how do we draw the line, I would say, in a way that protects the integrity of our values as a nation and our values as a democracy.
Yeah, that's kind of
But I'm not sure where that line is, to be honest. I know that it's before you go onto a plane and yell, I have a bomb and I'm going to blow this plane up.
Yeah.
When you don't really intend to do that.
Yeah, crowded theater, yelling fire scenario, right? Like it's got to be before that. But now it's almost like this internet, it's a new thing. You and me and 7 billion other people are all standing on this huge field, and some of it's got really dry grass in certain areas and some of it doesn't. Some of it's near gasoline and so different flammable things, and everybody's got a handful of matches. Some of us have more power than others, more influence. Some of us have a lot of matches, some of us only have one. And it's like right now ever since the internet burst, it's just like everybody can light their match whenever they want and just start fires. This might become a huge brush fire, or this might just be like a little thing, but we're all really fascinated by the bright lights and the spectacle of it, you know, and the smoke and the fear, and it's just all exciting. And so here comes these private companies that kind of control the internet, as it were, like YouTube and iTunes and that sort of thing. And they say, all right, everybody hand over the matches, you know, and we're like, wait a minute, you can't have my match. I didn't light anything on fire yet.
Right.
And it's kind of weird. Like, you don't want to just like someone like Alex Jones, the more crazy he got, everybody started paying more attention to his fire. And so he just started lighting like crazy. And the rest of us are like, okay, we're going to use our matches in a constructive way, and we don't want people to use them in a destructive way. But who has that right to say that? It's not really a legal matter. We've got the legal stuff kind of worked out for now. You're not violating his right to speech. Not, at least the state isn't. So I don't know that even saying it's a freedom of speech issue is appropriate, but it certainly is limiting his speech, right? It's like the corporations are now in control. It's very Marxist, isn't it? In a way, like where you would say, we used to say, oh, well, whoever has the political power, these are the guys that we need to watch out for. And then Marx comes along and says, no. Those guys can be bought, Jack. It's whoever has all the money. They have the real power. They're limiting the labor, you know? And now we're kind of seeing that in the information age, right? Where the people, the corporations that have the money are able to control speech. And it's just a scary place to be.
Right. I agree. I mean, the corporations perhaps are taking over, are replacing the government to some degree. Because it's not necessarily the people deciding. It's not you and me deciding who we're going to censor and who we're not going to censor. It's the CEOs and the board of directors and whomever else is involved in those decisions in these big corporations that are making these decisions about who gets to speak and who doesn't. And I think that as someone who identifies as liberal progressive, I think the challenge for me is not to be okay with it simply because these tech companies tend to be on the liberal end of the spectrum. Like, would I be okay with a company doing that was, clearly identified as conservative? Right? Do I protest less or not at all when it's like, oh, well, it's Facebook and, Mark Zuckerberg is how do you pronounce his last name?
Yeah, Zuckerberg.
Mark Zuckerberg identifies as liberal progressive, so he's doing something with that worldview in mind. So it must be the right way to go. So I think for me that's the challenge is not letting them off the hook simply because they're on the same side of the political spectrum as myself.
That's what's going to happen, right? Eventually, one of these right wing super PACs or whatever, PragerU is going to combine with NRA, it's going to combine with the Koch brothers or whatever. Eventually, they're going to start their own social media site. They're going to make sure that it gets real popular, and they're going to start controlling the people through it, right? I mean, that's inevitably what's going to happen. And if you think about it, that fear that we're talking about right now, that's probably how a lot of right-wing people feel about something like Facebook or YouTube or any of these social media networks that are controlled by, somebody out of California, some nerd that built a computer in his garage and made $1 billion, and he's super liberal and likes to have avocado toast. Like they don't want them controlling what they get to hear and say. So that's inevitable. That's weird.
I agree. And I think it's something that we're going to, I hope that we continue talking about this as a nation and our government officials continue talking about it because I don't think we just want to hand over power to the corporations for a lot of reasons.
Hey, I feel like we got off track. You're easy to talk to, man.
Oh, thank you. Likewise. Well, can I did, you asked 2 questions when you first asked me about this topic. Can I go back to the other question? I didn't have a chance to answer that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah? Okay. So you also asked me about does Alex Jones being censored, does that fuel, people, for example, people who believe in QAnon? And I think that's also a really interesting question. I mean, there's the censorship issue that we got into, but there's also, what does this do? I mean, I guess you asked, is this something that we should do? And I guess there's there's the question of should we do something in terms of anticipating whether or not it's going to have a positive or negative impact on, people who believe in QAnon, or do we actually, or is that not really the relevant question? Is the first question that we need to answer the one that we just addressed in terms of, is this a speech, a right to speech issue? But I think let's say putting that aside, kind of putting aside whether or not he should have been censored just in terms of speech rights. I think that there is the potential for him being pulled to feed into, for example, the QAnon conspiracy, because I think one thing that happens, again, going back to what we talked about before with circumstantial evidence and the desire to believe something is true, is that I've noticed that sometimes when people are in that frame of mind, that conspiratorial thinking frame of mind, that they will take ambiguous information and they will interpret it in line with their beliefs and the narrative that they think is happening. So Alex Jones is getting pulled because that's actually the deep state at work. They're working with Facebook. They're working with YouTube. They're actually the ones pulling the strings. I even remember reading an article where they talked about how QAnon supporters, at least some of them, will take things that Trump says and they'll interpret it as some kind of cryptic message to them.
Wow.
Confirming that what they believe is happening is actually happening. And to me, like, that's way below the threshold of what would be considered evidence that would allow us to justify those kind of beliefs.
Yeah, like the second letter of every single word that he said is either Q or something like that.
Right, exactly.
It gets two numbers in between 9 and 11.
It gets to that point.
Yeah.
And so I think that's one of the, and I'm not, this is not specific to QAnon or to Flat Earth, but when people engage in conspiratorial thinking, I think that's one of the problems, is that they start interpreting information that's ambiguous in line with their belief system, and they end up supporting their belief system, even if that support is not really warranted.
Yeah, it's like we're always seeking patterns.
Mm-hmm.
And
exactly.
Yeah. But let me ask you this. Is there a conspiracy theory that you tend to lean toward yourself, or maybe one in the past that you used to think and you're kind of ashamed of, maybe?
Right. Well, there's no conspiracy theory that I've delved deeply into. I can't really say there's anything I've looked into enough in terms of done my research, my due diligence to feel confident. But I guess the one that I have, that I've looked into a little bit in terms of is 9/11, in terms of watching that documentary, talking to people I know who've delved into it more deeply. And I would say there is some information there that strikes me as very odd. For example, with the 9/11 conspiracy, the way that the buildings fell, when I've watched interviews with people who know about engineering and architecture and the domains that allow them to know how a building should fall and what it takes to knock down that kind of a building. And it's very suspicious to me when I hear that information from people who are experts in those domains, and I watch the video and you look at how the building fell. I come away from that thinking, well, something fishy is going on. I'm not willing to go beyond that and say what's going on, but there's something fishy, and I'm not convinced that what the government says happened is exactly what happened or why it happened. So, but I guess my motivation to go further is not high enough that I'm spending the time and energy to look at it more deeply.
But I'm on the outside, I'm looking in. I can see through you, see your true colors, 'cause inside you're ugly like me. I can see through you, see the real
I want to pick your brain about indicators of whether or not what we're thinking is conspiracy theory or what we're thinking is rational. Like, I'll throw out an example, and maybe you'll see where I'm going here. Like, whenever I talk to a conspiracy theorist and I say, well, here, this should falsify your claim, and they respond with, well, yeah, that's what they want you to think. That kind of thing. Like they'll say, here's we didn't really go to the moon. And I say, yeah, but here's some footage of Neil Armstrong, on the moon. And they'll say, well, that footage, I mean, it looks fake, doesn't it? So obviously the thing that you're showing me is strengthening my idea. So anytime I offer evidence against their claim, their idea gets even stronger. And anytime I start seeing something like that, even if it's someone talking about religion, there's always like some kind of idea within religion where there's some kind of demonic or satanic power. So if I say, yeah, but all these people said this thing and that's contrary to what you're saying, and they'll go, yeah, well, those people are being influenced by demonic powers and dominions. Or anytime I say something and they say that even is part of my conspiracy theory, the thing that you're saying, that's like an example where I go, okay, this guy, he's too far. That's a conspiracy theory. He's not even able to consider other ideas or consider something that might falsify his beliefs. Are there other things that you would say we can know if we're talking to our drunk uncle on Thanksgiving dinner? when to go, okay, I see where this is going. Or even if we have ideas ourselves where we can start to question and say, maybe I'm not being the best skeptic right now.
Sure. Well, I think you hit on one of the major red flags for me is falsifiability. It's a person approaching the topic. I mean, if I would argue if someone is truly seeking truth, then they need to seek it in a way that their beliefs are falsifiable. And if a flat earther or someone else wants to approach a topic and kind of discern truth from non-truth in the spirit of the scientific method, then they need falsifiability. I mean, that's what the scientific method is built on, is falsifiability, that we need to make predictions and make statements that are falsifiable. And I think that's one of the things that, for me, is a red flag when I've heard a lot of flat earthers talking about their belief system, is that they create this non-falsifiable version of their belief system in a similar way, like you pointed out with people, for example, religious. Like, for example, one debate that really interests me is the in terms of whether Jesus was a mythological character inserted into the stream of history, or whether he was actually a human being. And so, you have the Christian apologists who say, well, not only was he a real human being, but he did all the things that the Gospels talk about. And so you might say, well, what do you make of the fact that there was a savior narrative that existed well before Jesus was born, and he lines up perfectly with this narrative, and he matches most of the qualities that we find in other saviors that were supposedly existed before he did. And then they'll do what you talked about. They'll say, oh, well, Satan planted those ideas to trick us, to try and get us to doubt Jesus's divinity.
That and dinosaur bones.
Right, and dinosaur bones, right?
Stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, when someone's in that mindset where it's not really, I would say, if someone's in that mindset, it's not an argument of information, it's an emotional argument. And so you're not coming up against your facts versus their facts. You're coming up against these powerful emotions and motivations, that there's some basic psychological need or basic set of psychological needs that are being met, I would say, by that belief system. And so they're probably not going to change unless how those needs are being met by that belief system is kind of there's some kind of substitute, something else that kind of meets those same needs. Because I think when someone gets in that mindset of basically you can't falsify what they believe, no matter what you provide, whatever information you provide, they, like you said, they spin it and they turn it into evidence for their position, when actually it's evidence that's contrary. It's information that's inconsistent with their position that you would think would cause them to pause and say, okay, I need to figure this out. And that's one thing that I think I've seen happen very often with flat earthers, in terms of how they construct. And actually, one thing I've noticed is that flat earthers have to start from a place of making a pretty big assumption. Well, actually, two assumptions. So one is that the moon landing was faked, right, which you talked about. But not only do they have to assume the moon landing was faked, and like you said, there's photographic and video footage that they can look at, and you can look at, and you can say, well, what do you make of this? And they can flip it around and turn it into something that supports their belief system. Before they can even do that, they first need to make an assumption about the intentions behind the fake moon landing. So let's say let's give them a fake moon landing. Because I know people who believe in a fake moon landing who are not flat earthers. So let's give them the fake moon landing. So let's say our government did that. What if our government did that to win the space race and to create a feeling of national superiority and pride? If that's the case, then there's no reason that they would continue to engage in deception about the shape of the Earth. There's no reason that we'd have no good way to explain why SpaceX, why Russia, China, the International Space Station would be creating fabricated videos and pictures of a spherical Earth. So before they can even start building a case for a flat Earth using terrestrial evidence and observations, they first need to make this huge assumption. And I don't really hear them talking about that assumption that they're making. Have you?
No, and I think you're keying out on something interesting, because that's the weird thing is when you say, why would everybody do this? Like, why would all these countries be in on it? Like, what's the purpose? It's always just a real vague, like, well, it's, follow the money. Well, that's not how, they just, or they'll say that it's some kind of Illuminati thing, and that's just supposed to sum it all up. And it's just not the why. What's the motive, I think, is always the best question. At least that's what I've run into.
Right. And I've never heard, for example, I haven't heard any flat earther talk about, I've only heard them talk about the evidence for the deception, the moon landing being faked, but no one ever, and again, I've watched videos about the moon landing being faked and then counter arguments, and I'm not convinced that our government faked the moon landing based on the footage, but even if we give them that, where's the evidence that the intention was to trick us about the shape of the Earth? Right? Where's the evidence that SpaceX, the ISS, etc., that the information we're getting from those entities, is fake? For example, sometimes you probably heard this also, that some flat earthers will mistake composite for CGI, and use those two interchangeably.
Yeah.
Right? And say, well, it's CGI. Well, creating a composite photo is not the same thing as fabricating a photo using CGI. Right? Those are two different techniques, and we probably all at some point have created maybe not a composite photo, but an edited photo. I mean, if I take a photo and I change the lighting, that's an edited photo. Right? But it doesn't mean that photo doesn't reflect something that's actually happening out there in the world with a good amount of accuracy.
I think a lot of people don't realize that anytime you're taking a picture of something big, the only way to actually get a clear image of it, especially like something like a planet, for one, from space, they'll ask for give me a picture of the Earth that's not composite. And I'll be like, well, how about the Voyager 1 picture, like from all the way back behind Saturn or whatever, it's like, that's what it looks like if we take a real picture, because you have to be that far away to get it. So and it looks like shit. And I mean, we do the same thing with large buildings. If you want to take a picture of a large building and make it look really cool, you got to take multiple pictures all the way up. That way each image can be detailed and up close. And if we hold our cell phone and do those, what are those things where you kind of like, you move it to the left?
Oh, panoramic shot.
Yeah, and that's kind of like composite too, right? And I think that's a little bit, it's creating a impossible way to prove them wrong. They're like, well, if you don't take it this way, then I won't believe you. It's like, yeah, but if we take the picture that way, you're not going to be able to see anything anyway. It's just a limitation of our technology.
Right, and I suspect that way of reasoning and arguing, it's coming from that place of that, creating a non-falsifiable version of their belief system and of the argument that we were just talking about. Because I think that, the thing is, they have to, flat earthers that is, they have to believe in that moon landing deception. And then they have to assume what the intention is. And they need that because they need to discount all the photographic and video evidence from space. Because if they didn't do that, then really all the things they talk about kind of at a terrestrial level would be a moot point, right? Because if they say, well, how come I don't see curve? Or how come I don't feel the motion of the Earth? You could just say, well, I'm not, because the Earth is huge and I'm not sure why you don't feel the motion, but we know the Earth is a sphere because look at these pictures and videos from space. We have a very active unconscious mind, and the unconscious mind is very powerful, and we might have intentions that exist at a conscious level. We might have the intention to find truth. We may have the intention to engage in a sound and rigorous reasoning process. But things happening at the unconscious level can have an impact on what happens at the conscious level. There are certain ways in which certain biases can creep in, like confirmation bias, that's looking for information that's in line with your belief system, or things like cognitive dissonance, where we try and, make our behavior and our attitudes and our feelings and our thoughts and our behavior all line up with each other, especially behavior, from the past. We have another kind of category of that psychologists talk about. It's called motivated cognition, where, as it sounds, that there might be some motivators that kind of push us to cognize or process information in a particular way that serves us in terms of helping us protect our beliefs. And so all these things can be happening, and I don't know how much of this process flat earthers are actually aware of at a conscious level. And these are things that all of us as human beings experience. I don't experience it in terms of the earth-shaped debate, but I'm sure it manifests, in my process in other ways. So this is not, what I'm talking about are not things that are unique to flat earthers. This is just what it means to be a human being and the way that the human mind works. But, someone kind of discounting a whole category of evidence so that they can focus on what they're experiencing on the earth. And then there are other ways, even when they discount all that information that we have from space. I've noticed that they tend to then, some at least, tend to engage in a process of making their position non-falsifiable, kind of along the lines of what you said. So they say, well, show me evidence, on Earth that there's curvature, and you show them a video. Oh, well, I didn't take the video myself. Let's say you show them someone else's video. Well, you didn't capture that video, so how do you know the person didn't edit it? Okay, I'll capture the image, the video myself. I'll take a video. Oh, well, how do I know that you didn't edit the video? Well, okay, why don't you do this yourself? And they may or may not. I've noticed that at least some individuals who are part of the flat earth community will keep finding ways to dismiss the information that they're being given, which again creates the situation in which their argument is non-falsifiable. And their belief system is non-falsifiable.
Do you think it's like an identity thing? Is it where, like, once I say that I am a Muslim, for example, we use that one. I'm a Muslim, and if you start trying to get me to change my mind, you start offering doubt at me, you're not just attacking my idea, you're attacking my identity. You're attacking who I am and things that I'm proud of about myself. Do you think that that's kind of how conspiracy theories work, in a way where I have this special status where I'm in the know? I've got the deets, baby. You challenge me.
Yes, I definitely think that can be going on. I think that I think this is a complex topic because there are so many factors that could be there. And for a given individual flat earther, all or just a subset of all the factors could be at work. And I think one factor could be the person's what we call the self-concept. Like, who am I as a person? And what do I strive to be, and what am I, and what things are important to me? How do I think about myself as an individual? So what do I identify with that's really important to me, that I value? Or what do I identify with that's just become a part of me? And it can be something that may not have a big impact on our reasoning process. So, for example, I play the tablas, which are Indian drums. And so, before I started playing those drums, I didn't consider myself to be a musician, but now that's become part of my self-concept because I'm a drummer. But being a drummer doesn't really have a big impact on my beliefs around, like, how does the universe work? How does reality work? But someone who has become part of the flat earth community could easily start to be impacted by that in terms of it becomes part of their self-concept. And they've invested time and energy in becoming a flat earther. And I think there are some things about being part of the flat earth community that could be very seductive in a way that it can be for all of us. Like, for example, the way that I hear flat earthers some of them talking about being part of the community, to me, it sounds very similar to how people sometimes talk about their religion. Like, we are this small group of people who have the truth, and it feels good. Like, it almost sounds like it feels good to be part of this community where we know what's going on and all of you are being duped, but not me. Yeah. And that can feel good to be part of this community where there's a lot of cohesion, social cohesion, and you feel like you know something that most other people don't know, and you're not being duped in the same way that they are.
That's a really cool analogy that you used, where if somebody comes up to me and says, whether it be flat Earth, or if they say, even my dad, perfect example, okay, real sharp guy, okay, well educated, somebody that you could go to for solid life advice, or just quick, what do I do about this financial situation, or like sharp guy, right? And he's even told me that he believes that they, that's how it always starts, right? With the word they have the cure for cancer. They're just not releasing it because that wouldn't be profitable to them. They got to keep you sick, right? So the government or the powers that be in, bioscience industry, they have the cure. And that, like, anytime somebody says something like that and you respond with, that idea is dumb, it probably does feel to them in the same way where if you're going to play something for me as a musician, and I heard it and I'm like, man, you suck. Like, it would hurt your feelings. And it probably hurts their feelings whenever we say, that's stupid, because, I think you're right. That's their identity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and our self-concept is powerful. And if we look at all the aspects of our self-concept, the more important something is in that constellation, the more energy we're going to put into it, and the greater the threat when there's something that we're encountering or exposed to that's not in line with that or challenges that.
In terms of that particular episode with Tyler Klatnoff, what's your takeaway about this idea, this guy, flat earthers in general?
Sure. Well, maybe let me start with another observation about flat earthers in general, and then I can tie some of the stuff I talked about to that guest Tyler. One thing I've thought about is, okay, let's say given there's a flat earther who believes in the earth being flat, but is kind of driven solely by these truth-seeking intentions, and is not being influenced by his or her self-concept, or is not falling prey to confirmation bias or any kind of emotional motivational bias. Like, why might someone believe in the flat earth? And I think there are two other categories of flat earthers that I've observed that may be the case. So one is, I've noticed there's some people for whom their flat earth ideas are tied very strongly to very fundamental core beliefs they have about the way reality works. So, for example, I've heard several flat earthers talk about the Bible, that they identify as Christian, or they at least look at the Bible as their sacred text, as a text they go to for truth and knowledge, and they believe that in the New Testament, or maybe it's the Old Testament. I'm not Christian myself, so I'm not incredibly familiar with the Bible, but maybe it is the Old Testament where there are certain quotes they cite that they believe say that the earth is flat. And so there seems to be this strong motivation to support the Bible. I've heard other people talking about how they tend to relate the global earth idea to the Big Bang theory and to Darwinian evolution. And so they believe this constellation of theories and concepts basically renders their life meaningless. And, and living on a flat earth that is a planet with a shape that's unlike the shape of any other planet in the universe, that they feel kind of like there's a specialness, in living on this earth. And then there's also people, like we've talked about already a lot today, people who believe in rampant, deception and mind control. And so I think that people who are wanting to support, their interpretation of the Bible, or wanting to feel like they have meaning in life, again, these are, wanting to feel like our existence is meaningful is a very basic human need. But I do wonder the degree to which these basic desires or these fundamental core beliefs about the structure of reality could have an influence on people's reasoning process, and potentially kind of impact the quality of that reasoning process, or the rigor of the process they go through to kind of form and justify beliefs. But I do wonder if there's a group of flat earthers who don't fall into any of these categories that we've talked about. I mean, I suppose to be a flat earther, you have to believe in that deception in terms of the moon landing being fake, so you can write off and dismiss, all the photos and videos from space. But perhaps there are flat earthers who believe that the moon landing was fake, but they're not someone who generally believes in conspiracies. And I mean, one thing I've noticed is some flat earthers, for them, they're following the data, so to speak, and they will say things like, well, I don't feel the motion of the earth. I don't see curvature. And I think that is one area where even if someone is not being, is not trying to justify some other core fundamental belief, that there may be ways in which a person might be led astray simply by relying on, for example, their senses, right?
Expound on that. As far as just relying on their senses, don't we all kind of rely on our senses?
Yeah, it's true. We rely on our senses. And I think the starting place that people need to realize with our senses is that I think that people tend to think of our sensory system, that is, our hearing, vision, sense of touch, smell, etc., that these things aim to create basically an experience of reality that maps on to what's happening 100%. Like, why wouldn't our senses do anything else but aim to create a representation of what's actually happening out there? And that is true only up to a certain point. So there's a lot of research in psychology and related fields, for example, neuroscience, that suggests that maybe our nervous system doesn't necessarily aim for 100% accuracy. What it aims for is what's helpful. And I would say what's helpful for survival. So what we experience consciously does not always map 100% onto what's actually happening. So I'll give you a good example from actually my own research. I did a series of research studies with a mentor of mine, in which we had people sit in front of a computer screen and they played a video game, a sort of video game, and it looked kind of like, it was very basic, kind of like almost like at the level of Pong. Back on the Atari system, where basically you had these two bars that were horizontal across the screen. In between the two bars, there was a dot that started in the middle of the screen. And so the task of the research participant, was simply to make the dot move back and forth across the screen. So they did that using the arrow keys. So they would, press the right arrow key, and the dot would start to accelerate going to the right. And then they'd press the left arrow key, it would start to decelerate. And if they kept pressing the left arrow key, it would start to move to the left. And so they basically use these two keys to accelerate and decelerate it, so it moved back and forth. And we just told them, here's how you move the dot. Keep the dot on the screen as best as you can. And at some point, the participant didn't know when the dot would disappear. Okay? And so we simply asked the participant to indicate where the dot disappeared.
You're just screwing with them.
We were, in a way, yes. I mean, there are plenty of psychology experiments. I guess you could say that we're screwing with people simply because we're creating a situation in which they're going to respond in a way that they might not anticipate. And so what happened was, so if you view our nervous system and our sensory systems as aiming to create a picture that's 100% accurate, then you would think, okay, well, they would see the dot disappear exactly where it actually disappeared. But that's not what they saw. They actually saw the dot disappear ahead of where it actually disappeared. So there was a space in between where the dot disappeared and where they saw it disappear. And this has been, we replicated it in 2 other studies. We published this in a peer-reviewed scientific journal. I'd be happy to, provide the link, for that article if anyone's interested in reading it. And other researchers across the country in the United States have replicated this finding in their labs as well. So this is not some fluke that we found. This is something that is definitely part of our visual system. And what we attributed to was the idea that our visual system is anticipatory, that it's anticipating where the dot's going to be. Now you might wonder, well, why would that be helpful? How could that possibly be helpful? Why would it be helpful to see something that's not happening? But we think about something like a cheetah hunting a gazelle. If its visual system can anticipate where the gazelle is going to be, and if it sees the gazelle where it thinks it's going to be, it might make it a little bit easier to catch that gazelle, get its lunch, and continue to survive.
Oh my God, like a baseball player.
Exactly.
We can't see a 90-mile-an-hour fastball. We can't predict that. I mean, well, I guess we can predict it, but we can't actually see it, right? At that speed.
Right.
The guy hitting it with the bat, he's got to try to figure out where it's going to be, and he probably thinks he sees it, but he really doesn't.
Right, exactly. So he has to anticipate. So his cognitive system has to work with this visual system to behave in a way that's anticipatory. And there's no other way. So if I don't know that if our system aimed for 100% accuracy, that we would have the game of baseball.
Yeah, I love how you were explaining this complex clinical trial that you did, the peer-reviewed journal, and I'm like, you mean it's like baseball? You're like, yes, Robert,
Yes.
Thanks for
Right,
that.
I mean, that, obviously baseball is not about survival, but we, our systems, our cognitive system, our sensory systems, we bring that into everything that we do. So it's not going to just be at work when we're doing something that actually is tied to our survival. It's going to work all the time. Just like our stress response, we get stressed out about things that are in no way a threat to our survival, right? Because our stress system is responsive to anything that we perceive as a threat, regardless of whether it's something that's related to our survival, the integrity of us as an organism. So I think that's where people need to start. But I don't expect flat earthers to understand that, because they're, unless they're a psychologist who's familiar with these research studies, and unless there's someone who, or does research themselves on this topic, these are things that we're not going to experience. We're not going to be able to notice them in our experience, because they're meant to be transparent, because our system is not, it doesn't aim to have everything that's doing be clear to us, right? Because it would probably be harder to survive, right? It's those things are happening at a level of transparency that we can focus on the things that we need to focus on at a conscious level. So when I hear someone saying, well, I don't see curvature, I don't experience motion. Well, maybe you don't see curvature and experience motion because your sensory system is not sensitive enough to detect those things. Or maybe that information is not important. Or maybe you're lacking the information that you would need for your sensory system to experience that. So for example, with the curvature of the earth, I mean, and you talked about this with Tyler, if you were to put a flea on a basketball, it probably wouldn't experience curve, or maybe a flea would, I don't know what the size would have to be, an amoeba,
Yeah.
There would be no experience of curve. We are not wired, our nervous system is not wired to detect curvature on the earth, because it really is not necessary for survival for us to experience the curve of the earth. So why would we expect to experience curve on such a large surface?
Yeah, like anytime somebody says something like, that just doesn't make sense to me, I always think in my head, like, well, would that help you on the African plain to not get eaten, find food, and then have sex?
Right.
Like, if it
Probably
doesn't,
not.
then it's like, all right, this is going to take a communal effort then, I guess. And otherwise, you're not going to do it on your own. You just can't. Like, that's really all we're good at, essentially, is screwing, eating, and trying not to be eaten ourselves, I guess.
Right. I mean, that's what our system is geared towards. And, and I know that some of these flat earthers reject evolution, Darwinian evolution, genetic evolution, and that's fine. If they want to reject that, we can still easily point to contemporary research, and we can just point to look at the way your system operates. The way your system operates suggests that this is the case. For example, if we look at research, just kind of in relation to that, if we look at research on how the mind works, I would say our mind we're not wired to be able to really understand at a deep, profound level the complexities and nuances of reality, which is why when you give people probability problems, people tend not to do that well when it comes to understanding the way probability works. For example, you can easily guide people's responses by information that has nothing to do with the way that probability actually works. For example, the way you frame, like if you ask people about risk in terms of giving a medication to a group of people to potentially cure some illness, but there's a certain chance that a certain number of people will die. The way you frame that question, you can frame it two different ways with the same probabilities, and people will answer very differently, even though the probabilities are the same. So if we're just going off of probability, we should answer the question exactly the same way, but people tend not to. So so I'll hear flat earthers saying, well, it doesn't make sense to me. Like it doesn't align with my common sense and intuition. Again, if your system is set up to survive, to do the things that the list that you mentioned before, then you wouldn't necessarily expect your mind to be really good at making sense of things that are not related to your survival. Why me and someone in another part of the world both experience themselves as standing upright when, one of us is at a different angle in relation to, the sun or something else? Like, yeah, maybe that doesn't align with common sense. But given what we know about the way the mind works and what our mind seems wired to do, we wouldn't necessarily expect it to make sense.
Dr. Hunsinger, thank you so much for your time today, sir.
You're quite welcome. Thanks for having me on the podcast.
Thank you to Matthew Hunsinger. Thank you for listening. Thank you also to Dave Blair at davefreesong.com/free music. Thank you to our patrons. You too can support us at patreon.com/right and learn more at therighttoreason.com. Next week, I'm going to be doing something a little crazy myself. I'm going to have some fun with you. You see, I had 2 conversations this week. Doubling up, baby. I moderated a debate between a Trump supporter and a former Trump supporter, and I also talked to a guy that believes in the Illuminati. I hadn't done anything political in a while, so I was going to run with the Trump stuff. But since we've been talking conspiracy theories, I thought you guys might like to hear something truly crazy. So I'm going to leave it up to you. Message me at the Right to Reason Facebook page. Hit me up at Right to Reason 1 on Twitter. Contact me at the righttoreason.com website. Or you can message me at patreon.com/right. I'm versatile. Let me know which convo you want to hear next week. And whatever episode everyone picks, remember that you have the right to reason. Yeah. Oh, I totally blanked out right then. What was that? I was going to ask you about, shoot. Give me one second. I got notes. I got notes.
You got notes.
This is totally just like a psychologist just landed in my lap. Like, hey, call me anytime. Like, oh my God, are you kidding me? Like, this is great. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. And yeah, and if you can get a flat earther who will debate me, I would be excited to do that on your podcast for sure.
I'll get you one.
Cool.
I'll set her up.
Awesome.
It's hard to get them. Bringing Tyler back, that'd be 3 times for the same guest. That's a little weird. But if I can't get somebody else, I'll just bring Tyler back.
Okay.
Either way, you know if it's Tyler, it's just gonna be totally wacky, which is just fun. But
yeah, he was. I was with you when I was listening to. I loved it because at times you're like, I was with you until you said that outer space doesn't exist.
yeah, that's
or
what
until you said this, it's like, I'm sorry, I can't join you. Just can't.
I tried so hard.
I know you did. I could tell.
Yeah, I'm gonna get out of here. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome. Have a good day.
Okay.
Bye.